Well, my friends, we've just got a bit more news on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It's been coming out a little bit faster than it had before now. We got those episode titles, although those are still a bit tentative and a bit up in the air. But we actually got our first look today at the live-action versions of both Boimler and Mariner from Lower Decks, who will be appearing in this season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I don't know if this was intended to be an official release or if this kind of slipped out. It was aired as a little bit of a buffer trailer on Crave, I believe, and it was a very, very short scene. So why they would have released this with no real fanfare, I'm not sure. However, it is out there, and unless there's some sort of mass takedown, we now have our clear shots of these two characters, and they're appearing next to both La'an and Pike. Now, obviously, I'm showing this behind you so you can see it. There's not much to it. There's not much action. They're just standing on the transporter pad. So we do know that they're going to be interacting, apparently, as we can tell, on the Enterprise itself. I know some people have fantasized, or that's not the right word, speculated that this will be a holodeck episode. I don't know if that would make any sort of sense. If this was a Lower Decks actual episode, that could make some sense. But as we've seen in Star Trek Enterprise, setting a show on the holodeck of another show tends to end poorly as far as the fans are concerned. So I don't know if they would actually go through with that. Like I said, if this were a Lower Decks episode, that's the type of humor I could absolutely see them going for. But since this is a 100% Strange New Worlds episode taking place in that canon, if they were going to stick this in there in a holodeck from another show, I can't imagine that would end well, even if it was for comedic effect. Also, on the same note, is this going to impact canon, or is this going to be a lingering plot thread? I guess I'm trying to say, are our characters on Strange New Worlds going to remember this encounter, or will this be some sort of a ball of timey-wimey shenanigans, something that has to be undone, and by undoing this, nobody is going to remember it, or maybe just the Lower Decks characters are going to remember it, or is it going to be something that our version of Pike goes into his future knowing, our version of Spock goes into the future knowing, which would then cause some sorts of interesting issues down the line, because we know that Spock eventually ages up into the TNG era, so he would be alive during this era of time. He would actually age himself up to that period of being able to interact with Mariner and Boimler when they become their actual age in the timeline. I'm pretty sure I just butchered the way I was trying to say that. Obviously, we can't have Leonard Nimoy providing his voice in a later episode of Lower Decks where they kind of discuss this and talk about it. That could be something interesting if they were going to do that, have these characters sit down and talk about their time back in the past. Although, I don't know. I have to imagine whatever is happening here will be not undone, but will be unremembered later on down the line. The fact that it's actually taking place on Strange New Worlds itself lends a lot of credence to the fact that it will be taken more seriously than if it were to take place on the Lower Deck show. So I can't imagine a lot of the more zany or the out there antics to play here. Which leads me to my theory about what Lower Decks actually is within the Star Trek universe, and this will be potentially the make or break point of that theory. So if you haven't watched that, I released a video quite a long time ago about my feelings for how Lower Decks fits into canon, and the long and short of that is, it doesn't, but it does. So here's what I'm trying to get at. Lower Decks, to me, is the 24th century equivalent of a television program, a holodeck program, whatever you want to call it. It is based on real events, real people within the Star Trek universe, but it's a fictionalized television program, for lack of a better term, of these events. So Boimler and Mariner, where my original theory went, were just characters created for the television series, possibly based on real-world characters. So this was maybe written after Boimler retires from service. He actually goes back and writes a fictionalized version of things that happened to him. And maybe it's not that long in the future, but perhaps this is also the reason, the way in for our characters who are reprising their roles, like when Tom Paris did a cameo. That's similar to when we have a sitcom today where a person comes on and plays a version of themselves. So it was actually the hero, Tom Paris, providing the voice for himself in Lower Decks. So Boimler and Mariner here are real people, they're real Starfleet officers, but their adventures within Starfleet, their adventures on the Cerritos, are more of a fictionalized, over-the-top, zany cartoon in the series. Their real-world adventures actually fit well into the Star Trek canon, and they aren't as overblown, they aren't as crazy, they aren't as shenanigan-filled, because they were just actual real officers. So I'm wondering if we're going to see something along those lines here, or if they're actually going to break through the multiverse and have the animated characters come back and take on organic, humanoid, three-dimensional form, live action form. I don't know. This is going to prove a very interesting episode, and as I've said 42,319 times in this video already, the fact that it's taking place within the Strange New Worlds show kind of feels odd, because how are they going to translate that oddball sense of humor if they're treating Lower Decks as an in-universe thing? If they're treating them, like my theory goes, as real officers and Lower Decks as a zany, fictionalized version, then I could actually see them fitting more in line with the Strange New Worlds concept of Star Trek, as if they were actually the animated versions of themselves. I guess there could also be some sort of temporal multiversal shenanigans where an animated alternate universe crosses into our universe, but that would just be a little over the top for Strange New Worlds right now, at least in my opinion. So I don't think they're going to do it that way. So I do think this is actually going to provide a fun episode for us. I don't think that the Lower Decks audience and the Strange New Worlds audiences cross over one-to-one, so it'll be interesting to see how they implement these two things together and how they're going to bridge that gap between fans, because a lot of the people I know aren't willing or aren't able to watch the animated shows. So for those people who haven't or don't watch Lower Decks, how are they going to explain these characters to a Strange New Worlds audience who may be completely unfamiliar with them? That's something I'm very interested to see as well, and I kind of hope that they might have brief cameos by a couple of the other characters. I'd love to see Tendi or Rutherford, especially Ransom, because he's the one that coined the term "those old scientists" in Lower Decks, and that's the episode title we think this crossover is happening within. So to have him, at least in some form, to get a little Jerry O'Connell live action in Star Trek, that would just be a treat to me, and I think a lot of people would enjoy that. It's the Sliders Star Trek crossover we never really got. So what do you think about this? I know it's just one image from a little snippet of a teaser we got. They're standing on the transporter. There's nothing really revealed here, but personally, I actually do like the way these uniforms look. I haven't really seen a full version of them in live action. I've seen the cosplay version, so to actually have these realized, they look better on screen than I would actually imagine, and I don't actually own a lot of the uniforms, but that might be one I'd actually consider getting, because I just like the uniqueness of it, and I hope they do have the little flaps and they actually address those and use them. I don't know why I put that at the end here. I was asking your opinion, so leave that below. Do all the YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, do all those fancy things, and until next time, computer and program.